The East Brunswick Human Relations Council held a program at the Community Arts Center called Conversations and Coffee, where a panel of community leaders and local residents were able to discuss bias and stereotypes in our town and how tolerance and respect can be promoted in East Brunswick and beyond.
Last year, the library opened up with a program called the World Cafe, and they had an opportunity for us to sit at tables and talk to one another about things that we thought were important in the community. And one of the things that came out of that series of discussions was the idea that bias really hasn't gone away. We may have fooled ourselves into thinking that we live in this bubble called New Jersey where everybody is diverse and we all accept people's differences. And while I think we do a much better job than many other parts of the country, it does still exist. And many of you would know that because you're kidding yourself if you think we live in nirvana here. We don't. Last year there was a rise in anti-Semitic bias crimes as reported by the Board of Education, and they had to deal with that, a rise beyond what we had seen. There's always been some low level of this type of bias crime, but it had risen. We've seen after the election, I don't know if any of you remember the big idea about cities declaring themselves as sanctuary cities, and I got a bunch of letters from some people saying, oh, Mayor, why aren't you going to do the same thing here? I can assure you that I got equal or more letters saying that I would never be elected again if I ever thought about doing that in this town. That immigrants don't belong here, and that why do we always have to give to them? And when I'm still struggling, it was an eye-opener that I don't think many of you know, and that's really the impetus behind having these type of discussions. There was a rise in Islamophobia that I can guarantee you still exists here, not just in this country, not just in New Jersey, but right here in East Brunswick. So to think that we are better than everybody else or to be in judgment of other places really is foolish. And that's why I felt this was a really good time for us to take stock of where we are, speak honestly to one another, speak, not write, and that's why we called it Conversations and Coffee, because the only way you're going to turn back the momentum that's moved away from the type of society I thought we were living in is to start conversation by conversation, person by person, and start to move back to a place that I think we really, really need to be.
When we're talking about bias, you can think of bias as, and this is a basic definition, cause to feel or show indication or prejudice for or against someone or something. All right? When we talk about stereotype, we're really talking about a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type or person or thing. Now, again, like I said, I wanted just to put that out there because these words are going to be thrown around quite a bit this evening, so it'd be really nice to have a general sense of what we're talking about. In 2016, the FBI said that they had recorded over 6,000 bias incidents here in the United States. And of all the categories in which they measure bias in, the one category that had the most incidents, of frequency, was of course racial bias. In 2016, over 57% of the cases that the FBI had taken notice of were in the category of racial or ethnic or ancestry bias. Right? When we talk about religion, which is very relevant today, it's not surprising to see that over half the cases of anti-religious bias was anti-Jewish bias, and the second category was anti-Muslim bias. The FBI also measures location when these incidents take place, and it was very surprising to me that the frequency in which bias incidents takes place happens to be in residential areas, in homes, right? So it's really important to talk about what we can do as a community to strengthen the bonds of our neighborhoods, given that this seems to be an area in which intolerance tends to rear its ugly head. Finally, I also want to just bring it back home and talk a little bit about the bias here in East Brunswick, right? According to the statistics that have been collected, in 2012, there was only 2 bias incidents reported. By the time we reached 2017, that number had jumped up to 31.
I think bias for the special needs population is the same as bias for any population. It's preconceived notions without information. You hear a diagnosis, or you hear that somebody's child has a diagnosis, and your first reaction is, oh, I'm sorry. The parents aren't sorry. The parents are thrilled to have this beautiful child. So that is, can you imagine if you have a child and that's a reaction that many of my parents get for their children? The other bias that I find is definitely stereotypes, is that if you have a diagnosis, that defines who you are, and it does not define them at all. All it is a small part of who they are. So if you meet anybody, or if you hear of anybody with any diagnoses, it means nothing. It just means it's a small indication of who they are, but it does not define them, like race does not define you, and religion does not define you. It is just a simple thing. So I feel like education, and maybe getting some of our young people in the township to come out and speak more, maybe even on EBTV, to be able to articulate what it is to be labeled, and how people then take that label and define you that way. I think that might be something that we could even think about maybe in the future. Just information and knowledge is what's going to help with all biases and stereotypes, I think.
What we're looking at doing is continuing to add programs. One of our big programs is Sources of Strength that you'll see in our secondary schools. And that's where we have adults and students of all backgrounds that can get together and talk about issues, get training, and have kids be able to go out and be what we call upstanders. We've heard the term bystanders, but we're looking for upstanders. So that's kids who will go out of their way to say, hey, that's not right. Or, hey, I like what you did over here. This is great. Let's do more of this. And so that's one of the goals that we have in our district, is to make more upstanders and to educate our community in terms of our differences, and to really enjoy those differences, to really come together as a group. And you know, we do have numbers that have grown in terms of some of the issues that have happened in town. But we have to remember, we have a diverse community, and we have people coming in from all over this country and all over the world coming into this community, because it's a great community. So it takes time to educate everyone and to try to bring people aboard.
1.6 billion Muslims in the world, worldwide. So question, are all Muslims Arabs? No. So in fact, the majority of Arabs in the United States are actually Christian. So bear that in mind. Where are the majority of Muslims from around the world? What country? Indonesia. So the majority of Muslims are from Indonesia. And that's followed by Pakistan and India as the number 2 and number 3 slots. Are there more Muslims in Syria or in China? In China, you're getting the, yeah. You're getting the theme. There are more Muslims in Russia than there are in Libya and Jordan combined. Again, I want to give you an understanding. There are different studies, as you know, indicating how many Muslims are in the United States. They range from 2 to 7 million Muslims, according to the U.S. State Department report. So that number is fuzzy. Out of that number, what do you think the ethnic or racial group is the highest of Muslims in America? African American. You're the educated audience here. So Black Muslim, Black Americans, 35% African American, 28% white, 18% Asian, and about 18% other. Again, breaking down of bias includes understanding what our stereotypes are and what we think who Muslims are.
For more information on the East Brunswick Human Relations Council, visit eastbrunswick.org or check them out on Facebook.